Hey, it's Jackie here from the Early Years Learning Hub. And before we get started, I wanted to let you know about our subscription option. If you're a fan of our podcasts and would like to see us continue to bring you interesting speakers on all of the topics you didn't even know you needed to hear about, as well as accessing some really great resources to help you put some of the ideas from the podcast into practice, then why not subscribe? It is great value at just $2.99 plus GST per month and is automatically debited from your bank account. Simply go to our website, Early Years Learning Hub, and click on the subscribe button. Welcome to another Early Years Learning Hub podcast. My name is Jackie Ward and I'm the founder and managing director of the Early Years Learning Hub. This episode is one of our practice sharing series where I invite teachers, educators and leaders to share their practice and tell us some of the practices that work for them. Today I'm joined by Ebony Birch-Hanger, Neuro-Sensory Education Specialist, and we will be discussing how understanding neurosensory systems support teachers and educators to better support children to self-regulate. This is the first of a series of 4 episodes where we'll be looking at an overview of key ideas to look to understand the why behind children's behaviour. So, Ebony, would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your professional journey?
Yes, sure. I originally trained as an early childhood and primary teacher. Since my own childhood years, I've been drawn to individuals who didn't quite fit the mould and who didn't interact with or the world or behave in a way that the majority do. And I found that I was always able to easily relate to and guide those individuals, even from a young age myself. And while working in childcare, kinders and schools, I quickly realised I couldn't support the individuals that I wanted to in the way that I wanted to within the systems and resources that were available in those settings. So I opened my own education and therapy centre where I ran individual and group programs for toddlers right through to seniors with a wide variety of diagnoses, medical conditions, and complex communication and behavioural profiles. I then went on to do additional training in special ed, deaf ed, neurodevelopmental therapy, and I worked as a specialist consultant across all educational settings. And it was over the years that I was running my own music and movement, speech and language, social emotional, and full educational programs that I refined my beliefs, my values, and my processes, which form the basis of the approach that I use and teach today.
Well, that sounds really interesting. And then a lot of different, experiences and qualifications and all sorts of things.
Quite broad, yes.
I'm excited to be talking to you. And it's funny because I've had quite a few people reach out to me around this neuroscience and understanding the brain and how it works, especially around challenging behaviors. And I think it's such an important topic at the moment because if you're following any social media groups or you're hearing from teachers and educators, there are lots of behaviors, challenging behaviors out there that educators are struggling with. So I'm really keen to sort of start off with importance of sort of working out the why. So can you tell us a little bit about how you work with that, about this framework and how it came to be?
Yeah, so my framework really began with intuition and instinct. So of me knowing what kids needed in the moment and why. And then, of course, some trial and error. And I found that I frequently had parents and educators asking me, how did you know to do that in that moment? Or how did you know what that child needed? And my response was always, I don't know, I just knew, which was that intuition that I had. But I realized that answer wasn't particularly helpful. So I thought, hold on, there must be, on top of my intuitive hits, there's got to be a process here that I'm using myself. So I sat down and I reflected on what my process actually was and the decisions that I was making along the way in the moment when I was with a child. And that's how the framework that I use today was born. So it was essentially reverse engineered from what I was already doing in my daily practice.
So can you tell us a little bit about that process, the working out the why? What does it involve?
So there's 3 main areas that I realized I looked at when I was in a situation with a child. And that's what we're going to unpack, I think, over the next few episodes, hopefully. But to give an overview today, the first one I look at is the nervous system. And there's different branches and different sections of the nervous system, and they're all relevant. Next thing is the environment. And that doesn't just include things, it also includes people in the environment and routines and expectations that are being placed upon the children. And then the third key area is the neurosensory systems. So that's the sensory systems of the body and the processing systems of the brain. And so there's a few other elements, that might pop up in various situations, but they're the three key aspects: nervous system, environment, and the brain and body systems.
I love that idea that we're looking deeply into understanding children's behavior, which I think is, and the antecedents and what are the factors that are kind of affecting the resultant behavior kind of thing. Where sometimes I read a social media post today, where someone was saying how, oh, we've put a behavior plan in place and it's not working. So the next thing is it's always kind of blaming the child, isn't it? Like to say, oh, well, that child just isn't suited for this space or whatever. That there's a problem with this broken child, rather than thinking about those things, like you said, the nervous system, the environment, and the neurosensory systems. So I think
Yeah.
this is a really high quality sort of way to view things, to say, okay, well, what are these? What's the interplay of these? And I think you called them 3 pillars of behavior, or the underlying sort of things that you need to consider.
Yeah, and there's always sorry, I just saw that post that you mentioned, and that makes me think that there's, it brings me back to that, I guess, that belief and value that I always have, which just popped up then, is that there's always a way and there's always something going on.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, I've worked with a really wide variety of individuals, several who had what would be considered very complex needs and behavioural profiles. And this approach that I've used and developed over the years has never not worked for me.
Yeah.
So once you do dive deeper and you find out that why, that's what allows you to put more targeted supports in place for the child.
I love that. I love that notion that we will definitely find a resolution is, I think, comforting for the child, obviously, and the family, but also for educators to feel like they can, find a great answer that's a win for everyone.
Yeah.
Which is good. All right. So on the flip side, let's unpack why some common approaches don't work.
Yeah. So I still see a lot of approaches that are rooted in behaviourism being used across educational settings. So some examples of those approaches would be negative reinforcement. So taking things away from a child that they may like if they haven't complied. First do this task that I want you to do, and then you'll get your chosen task or your preference. Positive reinforcement. So actually all forms of positive reinforcement, including reward charts and social stories, if they are used to tell a child what they should be doing or how they should be behaving. So all of those approaches are rooted in behaviorism. And the reason they're problematic is because they don't actually address the underlying need that the child has, which is actually the reason they're displaying the behavior in the first place. So often the strategies appear to work. And I say work because that generally means that we as the adults get the desired result that we may have wanted, but it actually means that the child is suppressing the underlying need that they have. And that need, if it goes unmet, it will continue to exist, and therefore it will pop up later in a different form.
That's interesting, because I know a lot of, teachers and educators often ponder about theory and how theory influences our practice. And this is a really good one, isn't it? Behaviorist theory tells us that, we can train children and people to do a certain thing, which we can. We can train animals to do certain things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that person understands anything about what the problem is, or how to fix it themselves and self-regulate and things like that. So interesting. So how do you go about sort of pinpointing the systems that need support? So, guess I'm sort of trying to think about, I'm thinking about actually while we're talking, Ebony, I've got a few tricky ones because we had our first week of preschool last week, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm interested to know, with a few children that I'm sort of pondering over, how do we figure out what systems need support? Like, what's the sort of approach?
Yeah, so we'll dive much deeper into this in the episode where we actually focus on the sensory systems. But the whole idea of Work Out Why is so that we can actually provide targeted supports. And it's when we pinpoint which systems are in need of support in a given moment, that's what allows us to actually move away from those surface level and behaviorism-based strategies that we just spoke about. So the more I learned about the systems over the years, the more I was able to select the best strategy for that moment, continually add to my toolbox of strategies so that I then had more to use in the future. And the strategies I was selecting were much more effective because they were targeting the system that needed support in that moment. So there are ways, obviously having a thorough knowledge of the systems and how they function. That's obviously how you can begin to pinpoint which system is in need of support. And as I say, we will dive a little bit deeper when we speak about those sensory systems. But the first key part is having an awareness of what those systems are. So there's the main sensory systems that everyone would be aware of, like your smell, taste, touch, sight, and hearing. But there's actually a few more that I'll mention in future episodes that people may not be as aware of. So first thing is the awareness, just being aware of the systems that exist. And then even just gaining a little bit of knowledge about what each of those systems are will allow people to sort of start to just, I guess, open up and look through a slightly different lens. And as soon as you start looking through a different lens, you start to gain more information every situation that comes up. And then you can just start to add to your toolbox from there.
I love a few of the things that you've said there, Ebony. First of all, I feel like I've got fairly good classroom management and individual relationships and good, guiding behavior kind of strategies. But I would say probably my approach is generally fairly generic, as in one size fits all, which most of the time works for most of the people. I mean, I'll probably do a few slightly different things, but that idea that, that we are learning about systems, because knowledge is power, isn't it? Especially for teachers, I think the more we know about stuff, the more we can do it better, whatever it is. The other thing is I really liked the idea of you speaking about a toolkit as well, and looking at a broad range of strategies. And I'm thinking to myself now, I would love to actually write those down. Do you have your sort of things written down, or you just draw on different things? Like, do you map things to say, oh, well, if this is, the system that I think is the trigger here, do you have them bunched up, or how does that work?
I have been blessed with an extremely good memory. Not so much now, but when I was, when I sort of first started working in the years when I was really deep working with a lot of different individuals. So it was all up here. But I did do exactly what you're saying. So I would have essentially maps that people might sit down and draw bubbles and arrows and connections and forming the connections among the system. And these approaches work best when this particular system is in need of support. And I did do that. It was just up here, not in written form. But every child that I have worked with, I have learned something from.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something important for educators to keep in mind as well, and to see it as an opportunity. Every child that comes into your care and to your setting is an opportunity for you to learn and develop and grow as an educator. And that's how you can add to your toolbox, because every child will present differently. Even if you have 10 children who need support with their auditory system, for example, those 10 children will still present differently. And so you can gain a strategy from working with each particular child to build up your support strategies for the auditory system just by working with 10 different individuals.
I love that too, that whole reframing of like, oh, this is a problem, this child's very violent, aggressive, disruptive, as opposed to thinking about it as an opportunity to learn and build your professional practice. And then, as you say, expand your toolkit, which you can then apply those strategies or individualize them for further children. I love that. I'm getting so much out of this podcast myself. I liked the idea too, how Ebony, you said, also used to have a really good memory, but as you can probably tell, I'm getting older now and I can't remember hardly any of the things that I used to be. And I was thinking to myself, though, I would think I would really benefit. And I think it would be a great collaborative thing, too, if we did a little mind map like that. I'm thinking about taking that to my team and saying, what about we think about this? What do we know and what do we notice? And even just doing that shared kind of observation of saying, well, if we're looking at it from this sensory lens, what are we noticing children doing? Because some of the times children give you so many cues, but you're so busy in your day to day, you don't notice all those cues that they're telling you that that's a problem. And I know definitely the auditory thing is a trigger for me. We had all of my family. We've got a big family and lots of kids, and we've only got a small unit, and it was very noisy here yesterday. My husband and I were like, oh, so noisy. So I always can relate to when children find it a bit overwhelming when there's lots of noise in an environment. It's a bit tricky.
Yeah, the
All right.
mind map is a great idea.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love a mind map for everything, but yeah, I think it's a great one to just for people to feel not so much pressure. I think it feels like because there's usually lots of I don't know, consequences when you've got someone, when you're supporting a child with some challenging behaviours or a disability, because, if they've hurt someone else, you've got to fill in all these incident forms and it becomes quite a burdensome and tricky time. But even just lightening the mood a little bit to say, well, particularly if you don't have anyone at the moment with particularly big issues, great opportunity to, do that sort of learning process now.
For sure.
I love it. So next thing I've put on our plan is to talk about sharing some targeted approaches. So really thinking about, because I always try and make sure the Early Years Learning Hub resources and podcasts and everything else is really very practical based. So what are some of the things that you would provide as a sort of an overview for our listeners to be able to apply in their practice tomorrow?
Yeah, so what we've just spoken about is a great segue into this, because the thing that I would start with, that I always suggest educators to start with, is a bit of a reframe and a lens shift. So, today we're talking about the overarching, the work out why. And the best way to start working out why is to just widen your lens a little bit. And the two questions that I still receive most frequently from educators and parents is, how do I stop this behaviour? Or how do I get this child to do X, Y, Z? And these are the two questions that I'm encouraging the listeners today to reframe. And so there's a few questions that I like to start with. And I've used these myself. These are questions that I have asked myself over the years and just became a foundation of my practice without me then even having to think about it. First one being, why may this child be demonstrating this behaviour? Then, what may this behaviour be trying to communicate? Because there's always a message. What might be influencing this child's behaviour right now? So that's talking about that environment, which we'll speak about in a future episode. What supports may this child need? So then starting to think about what you've got in your toolbox. How can I help this child to communicate their needs? Because the need is there. Sometimes they just need assistance to be able to get their message across. And how can I give this child what they need in that moment? So there are a few beginning questions that help us to reframe and just shift our lens a little bit. Yeah, and I'm happy to give you a list of those questions if you like. People might have been furiously jotting things down, so I'm happy to give you a list. I was thinking the same thing. Like I've got the notes here, but I think that's great, because those are some really good questions to get people really thinking about what's going on with that child. And I was also thinking again about this one particular little boy, and there was a bit of an incident last week with, he whacked someone in the head with a metal saucepan from our mud kitchen, quite a big golf ball on the head. So obviously something like that where other children are at risk, it's sort of like, we want to try and sort something out and identify those needs as soon as possible, don't we? Because we want to prevent any other children from getting hurt. But one thing I will note that really made me feel bad for him is that when the other educator brought both of the children in, because I needed to get some ice for the other one and obviously have a chat to this one, and he just looked really, really bad and really sad and really guilty about it. And I could tell already that as a 4-year-old, or he might even be three and a half, he is already getting these really negative sort of self-images of himself being not a great kid or whatever, And I thought to myself, well, that's something that I really want to try and address as soon as possible, so that I can ask myself all of these questions so he can feel good about himself, but everyone will be safe as well, So it's a win-win, isn't it, when you sort of start to think about ways that you can support a child to live, and learn and grow and feel good about themselves. So absolutely. And I think educators find themselves asking that, how do I stop, particularly in those moments like you just mentioned, because sometimes it is a safety issue.
Mm.
And we obviously need to be mindful of that. But when we ask ourselves, how do I stop? We put ourselves into a place of responding from reactivity.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't allow us to be as, I guess, selective with our strategies because we're coming from a
Mm.
reactive position rather than a more proactive position, which I guess is the second thing that apart from those reframes, the second suggestion I could give the listeners today is to actually ask a couple of specific questions around the strategies that they're using too. So a great one is, if I didn't use this strategy that I was about to use, what
Mm.
else could I do to support this child right now? And then, will this strategy give me the end result that I want, or will it give the child what they need?
Ooh, that's a clinger. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a difficult one sometimes, but because ultimately we want to make educators' lives easier. And that is the question that's going to make your life easier and your job
Yeah.
easier. Because if we're giving the children what we need, that is what's going to help get them to a place of regulation much more quickly.
Yes, 100%. Whereas if it's getting you the result in the end, they've not necessarily learned anything along the way, have they? Or nothing's
Yeah.
changed from their point of view.
Yeah.
In this particular instance, that, they did what you wanted them to do, but it might not happen again. Love that. And I think that is an amazing way to end our first overview podcast. And I'm hoping that our listeners will definitely tune in and have a listen to our future episodes to find out more. Also wanted to just shout out that we do have a few courses that might help our educators as well. One of them is helping children to self-regulate. And is there anything, Ebony, that you wanted to, because I'll put the course that we have in our notes, and I'll put the questions that you mentioned there as well. Is there anything that you wanted to sort of promote or call out of, if people are interested to find out more about your approach? Is there anything that you've got that you can sort of let us know about?
Well, just in terms of, I guess, the approach overall, probably the best way just to connect with me is just to follow me online on socials. My
Okay.
Facebook profile is where I do most of my communicating, and I put up a lot of content around tips and strategies and advice and practical things that educators can take away, and talking about different scenarios. So that's a place where educators can just connect with me and reach out to me if they want to communicate more, but also grab some further tips and strategies along the way.
Awesome. Well, I'll put the link to your Facebook page in the notes as well. Awesome. Okay, thanks for listening, everyone. And we will be back in first part 2 of our series, Neuro series. Thanks again, Ebony.
Thank you, Jackie.